Well, good morning. Happy Sabbath. Before we begin, let's bow our heads for a word of prayer. Dear God, thank you for this Sabbath day that you've given us. Thank you for this mission trip that I got to take part in. I ask that you send your Holy Spirit here this morning, that everybody will hear the words that you need them to hear. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. So, as most of you probably know, this last January and going into February, we took a trip to Tanzania. And there we went to an orphanage called Dunia Yahari, which means the land of blessing. As you see on the screen here, this is our crew that went, Linda and Jenny and my dad and myself. And as is tradition on these trips, we didn't even get into the country before our first miracle. We were almost there. We had made it through getting our passports stamped and all of that, and we were coming up to the exit of the airport, and I couldn't believe how smooth the trip had gone. And there was one last machine that we had to send our bags through, and they were just piling the bags on there, getting them all through as fast as they could. I figured we'd be through in 2 seconds and out the door. My bag goes through that I'd been carrying on my back the entire way, and they stop and pull it out, and the guy asked me to open it. He says, "What's in here?" It was my drone that I had been carrying to take pictures once we got there, and he tells me, "You have to have this registered with Tanzania Air Administration." I didn't know Tanzania had an air administration. The airport that we were in was probably about the size of the Green Bay airport, and it was by far the biggest one in Tanzania. So he calls this lady over and she takes me off into some office where it was probably about the size of our library back here, and there were 6 or 7 desks and a dozen people working in there on the phone with paperwork, tapping on computers. So I'm just standing in the midst of all of this, and she starts asking me these questions. Why are you here? What are you using this for? Why are you bringing it? You're supposed to have this registered. So I tell her I want to use it to take video of this orphanage, make promotional videos, help raise money for the orphanage. And she starts going around from desk to desk to desk, talking to people, and they keep telling her no, no, no. Finally, she tells me, "Go sit over there." And she leaves for, I don't know, maybe 5-10 minutes. And she comes back and she goes over to this one guy who seemed to be in charge. She kept asking him and telling him orphanage, orphanage, and he kept saying no. She came back and went over to him and he said, "Fine." She comes over to me and she says, "You can go." I'm like, all right, I'm glad I didn't lose my drone before I ever got to use it. So that was our first miracle that we had on this trip. Once we got out of the airport, this is where we ended up. We had to wait a little while because Norma, who a lot of you have heard about, was coming, and she was on a later flight than us. And this is the parking lot. You can see there's not a lot of movement of cars going on there, but we eventually got out of there. We had to wait for a second vehicle because we had brought so much stuff and people and all of our bags full of tools. So we loaded all of our bags into one vehicle that was going to be staying in the city for a while, and the rest of us crammed into one of these vans, and away we went. Getting there from the airport was also a bit of an adventure because our driver had been to this place one time before, over a year ago, and he didn't remember where it was. So it ended up taking us much longer to get there than we expected. It's normally about a 2-hour drive. I think it was probably 3, maybe 4 hours by the time we found it. I'm going to come down here for just a minute so I can use my pointer. You can see Tanzania is right here. For reference, Malawi is right down here. Here's a little closer look at Tanzania. This is the city we flew into, Dar es Salaam. And just south of Dar es Salaam in here is where we were. So here's the city. We took this road out along the coast, and we're right in here. So this over here is that main road that we were driving on. And this is the Indian Ocean. This right here is the property that Dunyahari is on. This is from Google Satellite, Google Maps, and you can see there's not much here in this picture. There's this one little building. The rest of the property is empty. That's what it looked like 3.5 years ago when Thomas and Beata arrived there. The story of how they got this property is pretty amazing. They came to Tanzania to look at several properties. They had one in mind long ways from here that they were going to look at. And they came with some experts, both African experts and people from Germany with them that would help them make a good purchasing decision. And they got to this property they intended to buy and found out that the realtor, or whatever they call them there, had lied about the property pretty severely. He had claimed that there was a dam and a reservoir on the property, but it wasn't. It was on the adjacent property. The trees were not in good condition. And they ended up saying, we just can't buy this property. So the weekend before this, going out to see this property, Thomas had been in Dar es Salaam, and he had a friend there who told him, there's this property on the ocean. You're looking for property, let me show it to you. And he told the guy, we're not going to buy this property. We're not trying to set up a resort, it's an orphanage. We don't want to be on the ocean, we don't want to pay for that. And the guy said, fine, 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 still let me show it to you. So he had nothing better to do, so they drove to this property. And this is the property that they ended up getting. 3.5 years later, this is what it looks like now. There is an operating orphanage, several completed buildings, and 5 building projects underway. The amount that they have gotten done in 3.5 years was really amazing to us. We kind of went on this trip not knowing what it was we were going to be doing when we got there. They had kind of said, oh, we're building a water tower, and we're building this, and we're building that, but they never really gave us anything that said, we need you here to do this thing. So we sort of took this trip as an opportunity to see the place and decide, is this a project worth continuing to participate in? And I'm just going to skip to the end and tell you that it definitely is. Here is aerial view from directly above the property. You can see the surrounding region. Right in the middle of the screen now is the local village of Puna. And you can see they are right on the Indian Ocean. On this one is taken at low tide. You can see where the waves are breaking out there. There is like a rock barrier that's underwater at high tide, but it keeps their beach really nice. The property that they own actually covers a lot of this beachfront that you see here. This is coming in the front gate. I want you to notice here that they're missing a lot of the gate at the time I took this video. The reason for that is because being right on the ocean, everything there rusts so fast. So the bolts that they had their gate put up with had just rusted away. There were 2 gentlemen there at the same time as us. They were actually there for about 2 months from Switzerland. And one of the projects they were working on was repairing this gate. So one morning at about 9, maybe 10, they left. They walked out to the main road where they would catch a bus into Dar es Salaam. They needed to get bolts to go through the pillars to hold the gate up. So they needed nuts and bolts. 2-hour ride to the city, 2-hour ride back. It's a pretty big city. Should be simple, right? They got back around 10 o'clock that night from finding bolts, something we would go down to Ace Hardware and pick up whenever we want. So now imagine it's that hard to get the things you need. How long do you think it would take to get all of those buildings built in a country like this? It's one of the most amazing things we've seen on any of these trips is just how much progress that they have made there in 3.5 years. The buildings that they're putting up have this special sort of thatched roof. This is what the building, or what the roof looks like without the thatch on it. And the thatch comes in these bundles, and they actually take these individual pieces. I've got a couple of them here. They take these and they tie them, overlapping one after another, all the way going up the roof. And that's how they're putting the roofs on these buildings. I've got a couple of more pictures of them here. The rest of the buildings are cement, and then they put like a finishing cement plaster on it. If you look closely here, you can see there's a line of guys who are doing that tying of the thatch on this roof. It was kind of hard to get video of them because anytime the drone got close, they wanted to stop and watch the drone instead of put the thatch on the roof. But that's what they're doing, is they're working their way up this roof, tying with like twine these individual pieces onto the poles. The thatch needs to be replaced about once every 8 years is what they were told to expect. The building we're staying in was the first building they put up, so the roof is about 3 years old. I don't think it's going to last 8 years, but this is how they do the roofs there. That's what the roofs look like from the inside. You can see that the structure of the roofs is all wood, but then all of the walls and the floors and everything are made of cement. So continuing with your little tour here, where the drone had stopped on the video coming in through the gate, if you went a little farther, you would find this structure here. In the back, there's 2 big shipping containers. That's where they got most of the stuff they began the project with, the materials. And there's also some equipment they keep under there.
Alex, what kind of plant does that thatch come from? Do you know? Did they ever tell you what? Is it a tree? Is it a grass? It is a grass. It looks like grass.
Yeah, it seems like some kind of. I'm not sure.
Is it native?
The mango?
Yes, from the mango trees.
Okay.
I don't think it's mango leaves. They're not that long.
But the ladies sit underneath the mango trees and they bring them
Oh, that's where they make them. Yeah, I'm not sure what it's made of, but you can take a look at it later. These 2 buildings that you see here, the one that is farther away from the camera right now is the first building they built, and that building is the orphanage for toddlers. They keep babies through age 5 in that building. Currently they have 15 kids. The oldest one I think would have just turned 6 now. 6 of them are babies, assuming Jenny and Linda didn't steal any of the babies in their suitcases. They said they were going to check. The building on the right side of the screen now will be the boys' dorm for boys ages 5 or 6 up through age 12, because they have some boys that need to be moved out of the toddler and baby house. The building straight back then is not as close to being finished. That will be the dorm for the girls ages 6 through 12, but they have a little longer before they're going to need that building. But the boys' dorm there on the right is just about finished. It just needs a little more plaster work inside. And eventually they'll put up buildings for teenagers as well, but they only take children under the age of 3 so that they can raise them all the way up and teach them good values and things. If you start taking children off the street in a country like this, you end up with a whole different set of issues you have to deal with. So they are just sticking with the one way of doing things, which I think is going to be a good choice for them. This is just a closer look at the finished building that they're using. You can see the building has an upper floor there. That's where Dad and I slept. I think if you look close, you can actually see me in that window there, flying the drone. This is the girls' dorm building that was still under construction. The roof was finished while we were there, but it needs plaster over pretty much the whole thing. They had started working on that while we were there. The other building that they're just finishing now is what they're calling a bungalow. This is where Thomas and Beata, this is their house. They sold their house in Austria to build this. Their plan for this property is to put up 4 of these buildings, and 3 of them will be used as a lifestyle health center that will be used, they'll use the money from that to support the project. So getting this property on the beach, which will be an attractive place for people to come, is actually turned out to be a huge blessing for them because it's their long-term plan to support this orphanage. Just another picture of the views that you have from there. Where this building is, there's a drop-off just beyond that, so they're going to put all the bungalows right on that ridge, so they all have this nice view of this pretty blue ocean. Another building that they have under construction is the school building. They're going to have the school not only for the orphanage kids, but also for the community to come to. This building is laid out so that they are going to have some movable walls, so they can put 3 classes in this building and change the size of the rooms as needed. And then on Sabbath, they're going to take those walls down and use this building as a church. There is a church in the local village that they go to right now, but even with just the 15 kids, that's a lot of work to pack all those kids up and get them the 2 miles to church every week and back. So as they expand their buildings, they plan to have 60-plus kids here. So taking them across town for church is just not going to be feasible. So they're going to be having their own church services here and invite the community, I'm sure. Another picture of the school building. This road that you see here is their property line, where you see the fence there. So the next project, once they finish all these current projects, is going to be to put a cafeteria building near the school here. And this property that's in this triangle shape at the bottom of the screen, they actually managed to purchase while we were there. So I think that's where they're going to plan to put the cafeteria. They also have a really, really nice garden there. There is an organization that provides them with beans and rice, the sustenance sort of filler food, as long as they provide fruits and vegetables for the kids. So a lot of it they grow right there. And as the kids get older, they'll start working in this garden as well. I'm not even sure what some of the things that they had growing there were, but there were things that we recognized. They have watermelons and corn and this was, they were picking greens for use in the supper one night. All right, so from here, I'm just going to tell you about a few of the things we worked on pretty quickly. The first thing we started working on was right at the bottom of your screen there. That is going to be a water tower that's going to supply water for the orphanages that are on this side of the property. So this is what it looked like when we got there. It needed bricks laid up to the top of those poles and then a cement floor put on it. On the upper part there. And that's how they do their mortar, is they mix their sand and their cement and put it in a big pile, and then they dump water in the middle. And they mix it all by hand with a shovel. And then you just kind of work your way up. Dad and I worked on this for a few hours, but we're not as fast as the locals were, so we eventually got in the way and said that they could keep working. After that, we moved to working in the school. There's one section of it that needed a second floor put on, and this is one of the few things on the property that's built with this sort of wood. They have a lot of problems with termites there, so they need to get special treated wood, and cement is just much cheaper than using wood, but this part we built. So we framed and then put the second floor on this part of the school. That will be like a principal's office below and a teacher's thing above. I'm not sure exactly how they'll use it, but that was something we worked on. We also worked on helping get some new solar panels installed. It wasn't these ones in particular, but we worked on that one day. There is electricity that runs by the main road, but it's not reliable. So right now they're working everything on solar. And then they started working on the front porch. This is the boys' dorm. Just off screen to the left is the finished building. So you can see there they have the trench dug to put the foundation in for this front porch. We helped put together some rebar that would be used in there. And then we got to haul wheelbarrows of cement. That's always fun. This is them doing the upper part of that water tower. We were ready to jump in if they decided to make a line of people handing the cement up, but we didn't think we would last very long carrying 5-gallon buckets of cement up and down this 45-degree ramp. So we let them go ahead and do that part. This is back then once we got the foundation in. This is the last part of that before it gets filled back in, and then new cement put on top for the front porch. There'll be pillars poured there to put a roof over it. And then my dad and Jenny worked on pouring a sidewalk between the two buildings. There was this kind of a path that everybody sort of followed, so they decided it'd be a good idea to put this sidewalk there. One of the things we found really interesting, and it was similar to how they did things in Haiti, is that they don't finish their cement with the first pour. They pour it however thick they're going to pour it and leave it rough on top, and then they pour another layer over top of that to finish it with. Part of the issue is that the stone they can get there is not good stone, and in the rainy season the stone would erode away right out of your cement if any of it is open to the surface. Of course, we wouldn't have that problem here because we know how to finish cement and push the stones down, but they didn't. So while we were doing this sidewalk, they were shown how to use the tools that we brought to do their cement in one pour. And there is the finished sidewalk then. One of the big problems we had was bugs at night, mosquitoes. So that's my hand after a few days. And I don't remember ever getting bit by a mosquito during the day. But at night, you're sleeping in these bug nets, and if you touch the edge of the net, this is what happens. So I actually still have marks I can see on my hands and on my feet and ankles from all of the bug bites that we got. So that was one of the less fun parts of the trip. Another interesting thing we found, I went with some of the workers there to the local town for dinner one night. And in the village, they serve one thing. I didn't know what it was when I ate it for the first time because it was dark, but this is what they serve you. That's eggs and potatoes. It tastes just like our eggs and potatoes. When Dad found out that he could get eggs and potatoes in town, we went several more times. At one point, we took a trip into Dar es Salaam. So I'm just going to show you some of the things we saw. But this right here is a really interesting and very sad sort of thing. I didn't have many pictures of it to show you, but you see those buildings. Those are supposed to be apartment buildings that were never finished. And you see all the way on the right side of the screen, way in the back, same thing. This is a block of hundreds of these buildings that never were finished. Maybe not hundreds, but there was probably, maybe 6 or 7 buildings long along the road and probably 8 or 9 deep. So 50 plus buildings like this. that the government paid a Chinese construction company to build, and when the money was gone, the company left. There's giant cranes just standing around in the middle of there. So what happened is somebody in the government made a deal with this construction company that, hey, we'll pay you to do this, you send some money my way, and when the money's gone, they just pack up and leave because they all made their money. This was supposed to be housing for workers, for the poor people from Dar es Salaam, but even if you finish these buildings, it's way outside the city. So nobody who needs this building would be able to get from here to their job in the city. You see a lot of buses there. They just whip all over the place. And this is just some pictures of what we saw walking around. They have these, some of the streets through the city are for these public buses only, and they tear up and down the streets like crazy, so you have to really watch for them. But there's no other traffic on those roads. And then they have these privately owned shuttles that are what get people all over the place. And they line up outside the markets as wide as they can fit in the street and as far back as they need to go. And they just sit there and honk at each other until somebody moves out of the way so they can keep moving. After we had spent quite a while walking around the city, going from little shop to little shop, we went to the food market where they buy the fruits and vegetables that they don't grow. And this is where we went. This is underground. And it was probably in the 90s outside. There's no air conditioning anywhere. So all of these people, hundreds and hundreds of people with all of their piles and piles of food, sit here underground all day trying to sell enough to go home and eat that night. So that is sort of your overview of the place where we were and of the city there. But now I want to show you some of the reason that all of this is happening. The kids that they have at this orphanage. Every one of them, by the time they're 2 or 3 years old, has their chores that they do. Washing dishes is one of the main things that they do. The kids, as soon as the meal's done, they pack up all of their plates and bowls into something, they stack up all their chairs and tables, and whoever's assigned to do the dishes goes off to do the dishes. One of them will wash in one bowl and the other will rinse. One of the more amusing things that we saw there was one of the little boys eating scraps out of the dishwater. That's just the mindset there. If there is food, you eat it. Some more of the kids. Every day they pray together, they sing all the time. They get their big bowls of food, and if you gave them more, they would keep eating, but they're given what they need to be healthy.
Where do they come from?
This building that we're in, just to the right of the picture now, is a hallway that goes into the building where they have... Oh, where did the actual kids come from? Pretty varied. I don't know a whole lot of their stories, but I think that the government contacts them when there's someone in the area that has been found and needs to be taken care of. I know one of the girls was found on the beach nearby. Another one of the kids was just found left by the side of the road. One of the babies that they have, his mother died and his father couldn't work and take care of him, so he's living here at the orphanage until he's old enough that he can stay home while his father's at work. There are several employees, local women, who are called the mamas that take care of the kids. And they are on a rotating schedule so that there's always people there. I think they always have 3 on duty for the 15 kids. Chip, can you turn the sound on? That was the first day we were there. This is actually down in a little structure they've got built by the beach. You can hear it was really windy out there on the beach. I'd say we heard that song about 7,000 more times while we were there. Every morning, starting about 6, the kids would get up and they would sing on their way out to breakfast, and then they would sing while they did their chores, and they would sing on their way out of the building to do whatever else they did. It was just really neat to see how these kids are being raised. You know, they're singing about Jesus, and that's not something that would have ever happened if this place doesn't exist. While we were there, I think it was the last Friday there, we were all sitting around talking or playing some games in the evening after it was dark, and we noticed off in the distance, to the south of us, I guess, that the sky was glowing. So we're trying to figure out what's going on. So we climbed up on that new water tower, and we saw that there was a very large fire up a little ways out from us. This picture is taken with my drone. I actually flew it out there to see what was going on. You really can't tell from the picture, but that's somewhere about 200 yards wide, this fire that was burning there. So the next day I flew my drone out again to see what had happened, and all of this area was just burned. And we thought that was a little strange, but we had seen fires off in the distance before. This is the church in town that everybody goes to. It's about 2 miles from the orphanage. This is looking, where the camera is right now is directly above the church, and you can see this right out here is the orphanage. So our last Sabbath there, these are just some pictures of the Sabbath school classes. Our last Sabbath there, Dad and I are sitting on one side, and we had really come to appreciate how the church had the open sides like that. Because when we were in the Philippines, the church was basically a furnace, but having those open sides with the letting the breeze through felt really nice. Our last Sabbath there, for a little while we were worried that this church was going to turn into a furnace too. We're sitting there in church as the church services started, and we hear some noise coming from outside a ways off. And at first, we think that it's just the wind blowing through the brush, but then we start to hear crackling. And we look over, and this is from where I'm sitting in church. We see smoke. And a few minutes later, I see fire jump up about as high as my head. So at this point, everybody's kind of noticed that there's something going on over there. But the only ones who seem to care seem to be us and Thomas. And he's kind of standing in the back looking at us, wondering, what do we do? You know, do we need to leave or what's going on? And some of the church members had gone over there to kind of see what was going on and came back and just sat down like nothing was happening. And then the wind turned and started blowing this fire straight towards us, and the church filled with this smoke. So I'm starting to stand up. We're thinking, we're going to go grab these kids, we're going to get them in the truck, and we're going to get out of here. And right then, as we're starting to, the wind turns and the smoke goes away and starts pushing the fire the other direction. So for the whole church service, we kind of sit here and watch as the fire burns all the way around the church. And from this video here, you can see how close this came. That little building to the right is their outhouse, and the fire burned right up to the back of that, right around the church. And nobody seemed to really care what was happening. You didn't find people out from the villages. Nobody came out of these houses that you see nearby. But that's just common. When somebody wants to get rid of the weeds on their field, they set it on fire, and where the fire goes, the fire goes. But you can see how the fire started up in that top corner and burned right towards the church for quite a while until God sent a wind that moved it away from us. Our scripture this morning was from James chapter 1 and verse 27. Now, James is my favorite book in the Bible, and I have a very specific reason that I like James. You see, when I read James, every single verse steps on my toes. If you sit there and you read the book of James, and you ask yourself if your life follows what it's telling you, it can make you ask some really hard questions. James 1:27 says, "Pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their trouble, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world." What's your religion? I have to ask myself the same question. What's my religion? Everybody's got one. In this country and in most of the world, our religion is ourselves, isn't it? But God tells us, this is what you do. This is what I want you to do. It doesn't say, if I call you, go take care of orphans. It doesn't say some people should be taking care of widows. It says this is what God wants from us. When you go home this afternoon, I want you to sit down, and I want you to read James chapter 1, verses 21 through 27. I want you to ask yourself, is that describing my life? And if not, what do I need to do? God calls us to care for each other. He calls us to witness and to help the people who are broken. Every one of us. He didn't call the church as a whole. He called you. I pray that we all answer him.